Hello, welcome to another CleaveTech Tech Tip. Now today you join me back on the bench at home after a recent BSCRA Area Championship round. In case you didn't know, the BSCRA is the British Slot Car Racing Association. It's one of the oldest slot car racing associations in the world, and its purpose is to bring together slot racers in the UK under a common set of rules and organise national championships for different classes of car. So, as you haven't just thrown your car in the box at the end of the event, and you've done the things in one of my previous tech tips, I'll put a link on the screen now. When you get back home, there's more you need to do. So let's get started. So as well as doing my post-race strip down before I put the car in the box, I also made some notes on the chassis. And it's actually a bit of a coincidence in that this is tech tip number 33. And the motor in the car is actually numbered 33. So I've made a note of how long the motor ran for and any problems I had during the race in terms of the chassis or the motor. A little bit of a shame, as you can see, because actually it's a pretty fast motor. 80k at 5 volts. That's a pretty good 30-second Group 12 saloon motor. Now this arm not starting note that I've made there, basically when we have a track call, power goes off. When the track comes back on again, sometimes the car wouldn't move and you have to rotate the back wheels slightly and then the car would go. That's possibly down to a common fault that happens with these Group 12 armatures, especially the high-timed Group 12 armatures. When the com gets fairly small and the brushes are wrapping around the com quite a long way, you sometimes get points where there is a bit of a short on the commutator against the brushes, and that causes the car not to start. So one of the things I will look at when I strip this motor down is the com size, and see if it's even worth carrying on with this armature or whether I would need to replace the armature for a new one. Don't know whether you can also see, but if I rotate this, it says burnt arm here. I'll bring it a bit closer to the camera and you'll have a look. Here we go. You can see there is some burning appearing on that armature. You can see it's actually a bit burnt on the ends there. So clearly it's overheated at some point at the start of a race where it didn't move off the line. I had my hand on the controller, pulling the trigger down, maybe overheated it a fraction before it moved, before I realised it wasn't going to move. So maybe that armature is toast. It was still running fine at the end in terms of top speed, drivability, etc. But obviously if the armature doesn't actually start from a dead start and keeps needing a push, then it's no good to carry on racing with it. My notes might also include any issues that there was with the chassis or any maybe suggestions that I might do to the chassis to improve it next time. Things that I thought of during the race or things that I found on my initial strip down at the end of the event. But in this case, chassis was pretty perfect and there's nothing I need to do or nothing I've noticed so far that I need to do to the chassis. Maybe if the motor had only done 20 minutes or so of running, I probably would have left the motor in the car. But bearing in mind there's an issue with the motor, and it's already done 51 minutes of running, I'll probably take the motor out, strip it down, and I need to have a look at it. So let's get that motor out of the car. So when I'm taking the motor out of the car, I don't want to apply too much heat, especially to the areas around the magnets, because the magnets are glued into the can. And if I apply too much heat around these areas, I run the risk of obviously reducing the magnetic performance of the magnets, and I also run the risk of melting the glue or burning the glue that holds the magnets in, and then the magnets could potentially fall out of the can. So I need to be fairly quick around the front and the back of the motor where it's soldered in. But let's move on. Let's get this motor out of the car. So I've got my hot soldering iron, a little bit of solder on the soldering iron. Lead wires off. A knife's a very good thing to go down in between solder joints. So again, you don't have to put a lot of heat into things. The knife down there. I'm then going to heat this front solder joint here and then just move the motor up a little bit like that. Then I can just gently heat the back and the motor is out. At that point, I might just reflow the solder around where the motor was on the chassis just to neaten it up so there's no big lumps of solder. Also, I'll remove as much solder as I can with the soldering iron from front and back of the motor. Again, I'm going to be very quick on the sides of the motor just to wipe as much solder off as I can, like that, and it sort of sticks to the iron, and I can always wipe it off the iron in a moment. I'm then going to remove the pinion. Again, put my knife gently behind the pinion, put a little bit of solder on the soldering iron just to get a good contact, heat it up and push the pinion off gently with your knife. Now there's a whole load of pinions that you need for slot car racing. I have my box of pinions here and some various other things. I've got them all labelled up with the, in most cases or often cases, I've got the manufacturer, the pitch of them, the number of teeth and the size of the hole down the middle of them. So I'm going to put this pinion back in the right place. It looks okay, it's not too worn, so I'm going to put it back in the right container and then I can use it again next time. Sometimes I will actually take the pinion and I'll put it in a little bag or wrap it in a little bit of tape and mark which motor the pinions actually come off of, because that pinion might match that shaft really nicely or run very nicely on that shaft, and therefore I want to keep those together so I get nice gear mesh each time. I'll now move the chassis out of the way and I'm just going to clean off some of this solder off of the motor with my knife. Just gently scrape off the remains of the solder just to clean up the can and make sure there's no lumps of solder all over the can.
"12 seconds later."
So after I've scraped off all the solder, you notice there's solder that can get in everywhere. I know I'm going to strip this motor down anyway, so I'm not too worried about getting bits in it because I can clean that up when I strip the motor down. But I'll tend to give it a blast off with my X-Power air blower. Again, I'll put a link in the description for this. You might have seen this in previous videos. Really powerful, really good. Saves you having to have a compressor running at home or in your workshop if you don't actually have one. This is much cheaper and generally much quieter. So I've blasted it out, and I'll use my favourite material from my last few videos, CleaveTech. Again, I'll put a link in the description of where you can get it from. Just a reminder, it's a sort of stuff that you probably use to hold posters and pictures and stuff, stick them on your wall. It's sort of semi-tacky and semi-permanent fixing method. You get it in stationery shops and things like that. You can even get it in supermarkets here in the UK, but I'll put a link of where you can get this on Amazon. But I use this, brilliant for cleaning up motors or cleaning up anything really. You can even use this stuff to clean the inside of your real car. You know, if you get all the bits around like the gear stick or around some buttons, etc., you can use CleaveTech around the buttons and it picks up all the dust and all the little bits and pieces that have got in and around those buttons and can clean your car up really nicely. So I use it for all sorts of cleaning stuff. So all the bits are now cleaned out of the motor. I'm then going to run my motor a little bit, turn it over, and I'm going to clean the solder off of the shaft where the pinion was. So let's put that on there. Turn the power supply on first, it always helps. About 3 volts. Turn that over, give it a flick. Can I get this motor to actually start? There we go. Motor's actually started. Take a knife and I just run it along the shaft just to clean all that solder off. Why am I cleaning the solder off? Well, I'm cleaning the solder off so that when I remove the armature from this bearing, I know that no solder is going to get caught in the bearing. I'm going to be able to slide the armature out nicely and it's not going to get caught on the inner race of the bearing. Also, if I were to comb-true this armature, it's probably toast, but if I were to comb-true it, again, I'd want to make sure there were no lumps of solder on the shaft so that when it span over in the comb-truer, it was spinning nice and true. So that's the motor done with for now. So I'm going to put that aside and I'm going to come back to the chassis. And I'm going to do the same. I'm going to clean this solder, a little bit of solder off of the chassis where the motor was in, so it's all ready for installing a motor again next time. I'm going to use my knife the same as I did before.
A few moments later.
And most importantly, make sure there is no solder underneath the chassis, especially where the motor had soldered in, because I'm going to check the chassis for flatness in a moment. In case I didn't spot it before, I'm going to give the chassis a little bit of a look over, especially around the guide area. If I've hit anything in the race, I might have damaged the front of the guide. If the front of the guide looks a bit damaged, or any areas of the guide look damaged, then at this point I'd probably take the guide off the chassis as well, and therefore I know I have to put a new guide on next time. But it all looks good. Even the braids look pretty good after 51 minutes of running. Just fold them back and make sure there's no dents under the guide here, because sometimes if you hit something you can bend the front of the guide here where the braids bend over, and that's no good. So I just want to check underneath each braid. No, they're okay. And so I'd probably give it a bit of a clean on the guide itself. So again, I'm using some lighter fluid. Again, I'll put a link in the description of where you can get this from, but it's useful stuff for general cleaning of your slot cars. So I bought loads from a pound shop a little while ago, but you can get it for similar prices on Amazon. There we go. Give the guide a bit of a clean. And it's, again, it's always worth wiping down the bottom of your chassis again, especially if you're going to now check the chassis for flatness. You don't want anything stuck to the bottom of your chassis, no dirt or muck or anything, tyre dust, etc. to the bottom of the chassis. And also give your block a nice wipe over. Make sure there's nothing stuck to the block, because you want your block nice and clean and flat to check your chassis. So I'm going to check the flatness of the chassis. By that, I'm going to hold down a corner and tap around the chassis. Make sure everything's sitting nice and flat and nothing lifts up or nothing moves as I'm pushing down on each part of the chassis. Try again in this corner. There's a slight movement here in this back corner when I press on the front corner here. So there might be a slight twist in the chassis there. But I've got to work out, is it the back corner or is it the front corner here? So I'm going to twist that round onto my block. So this is nice and flat. Push down again. Okay, similar. Try that corner. Nice and flat. So my guess is that there's a slight tweak in this front corner here on the chassis. So I can take it by hand. I can just tweak it down a fraction. Is that any better? Very nearly there. And I'm just going to tweak this back down a fraction, because I think it's probably in both places. There we go. Are we there? Yeah, it wasn't much, just a little tiny bit. And are the pans sitting nice and flat? If I press the pans, do they lift up anywhere? That all looks pretty good. They're not rocking. There's no lifting there. I'll also probably hold the outside of the pans down and lift up on the center section and see, is there an excess movement either side, or is it very similar lifting either side of the chassis? Obviously, if one side of the center section lifted up a lot more than the other side of the center section, then I'd know that there was perhaps a twist in the crossbar somewhere on the chassis. But this, again, this looks okay. There's an equal amount of resistance on either side of the chassis to lifting it up. It doesn't feel like there's any difference from side to side. So I'm quite happy that that chassis is in good condition so far for the next race. The next thing I'm going to do is check the bearings. Thank you for watching another CleaveTech tech tip. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe. There'll be a big C icon coming on your screen very soon. Click on that, or have a look at some of the other videos that I've done in the past. See you again soon.